Her empty hands caressed memories in the silence of a life that seemed to be withering. Catherine, with eyes that had forgotten how to shine, walked beneath the rain of her own tears, convinced that love was a language she would never learn to speak. Until one day, in the reflection of blue eyes, she discovered it's never too late to bloom. Between whispers and shared silences, she learned that scars can also be the beginning of something beautiful. Can a lonely heart be reborn after years of winter? If this story has touched your soul, give us that gesture of your finger that says, "I understand you," and tell us in the comments, how do you think this love story that defies time and loneliness will end? Your story is also part of ours. The mirror reflected an image that Catherine Thompson didn't quite recognize as her own. Her fingers, rough from working in the store, traced the contour of her face as if wanting to memorize each line, each shadow that time and loneliness had carved into her skin. 25 years, 25 winters, crossing the dusty streets of Dodge City, Kansas, where the wind whistled between the wooden buildings like a constant lament. Catherine adjusted the blue dress her mother had insisted she wear for the Independence Day celebration. The fabric rustled under her hands, a sound that reminded her of the dry leaves that accumulated on the store's porch every autumn. She wondered, not for the first time, if her life was like those leaves, fragile at the mercy of the wind, destined to wither without having been truly seen. Outside, Dodge City awakened with its usual symphony of spurs, horse hooves, and the rough voices of cowboys recently arrived after weeks on the prairies. The city bustled and pulsed like a living organism, while she remained motionless before the mirror, an island of stillness in the middle of the current. "Catherine, have you finished yet? The first customers will arrive any moment." The voice of Mary Thompson, her mother, pierced through the wooden door with the same efficiency with which she had run the store since her husband's death. "Coming." "Mother," she responded, gathering her brown hair into a simple bun. She looked at her reflection one last time. There was something in her eyes, a brightness that even she couldn't decipher. It wasn't sadness, nor was it happiness. It was perhaps the resignation of one who has learned to exist without expecting too much from life. The store's bell rang when the first customer entered. Catherine took a deep breath like a diver before plunging, and left her room to face another day in Dodge City, not knowing that this would be the last day of her old life. The Thompson store was a microcosm where all of Dodge City's stories converged. From her position behind the counter, Catherine could observe the daily parade of personalities. Ranchers weathered by the sun, farmers' wives with calloused hands, children who looked with greedy eyes at the candies kept in glass jars. It was on a particularly hot afternoon when she saw him for the first time. It's not that she didn't know him. In a city like Dodge, everyone knew who William Hayes was. His name circulated in conversations like legal tender. Hayes's ranch has doubled its cattle. Hayes faced 3 rustlers alone. Hayes rejected an offer for his lands that would make anyone rich. Catherine had seen him pass in front of the store mounted on his chestnut horse, had heard the admiring comments from her mother about that man who has made himself, but they had never exchanged more than courteous greetings, like 2 planets orbiting at a safe distance. That afternoon, however, William Hayes entered the Thompson store, and the space seemed to shrink around his presence. He wasn't a particularly tall man, but something in his posture conveyed a solidity that seemed to anchor him to the earth. His eyes, of a faded blue like jeans exposed too long to the sun, swept the premises until they settled on Catherine. "Good afternoon, Miss Thompson," he said, removing his worn hat with a gesture that revealed years of repetition. "I've come for that tool order I placed last week." Catherine nodded, feeling an inexplicable knot in her throat. Her hands, usually agile, became clumsy as she searched for the order list. A nail fell to the floor. Both bent to pick it up at the same time, and their fingers brushed for an instant over the cold metal. "Excuse me," she murmured, withdrawing her hand as if the nail burned. William observed her with a gaze that seemed to see beyond her surface. "You have nothing to excuse yourself for, Miss Thompson." "Those are working hands," he said, pointing to the small scars and calluses on Catherine's fingers. "The best kind of hands there are." Something in the way he pronounced those simple words made Catherine feel an inexplicable warmth rising up her neck. It wasn't an elaborate compliment, but it contained a sincerity that unsettled her. While she prepared the order, Catherine felt William's eyes following her movements. It wasn't a look that undressed or evaluated her, like that of so many other men. It was an attentive gaze, like someone observing a landscape wanting to memorize every detail. "I heard there will be a dance after the July 4th celebration," William commented while Catherine carefully wrapped the tools. "That's right, Mr. Hayes," she responded, keeping her eyes fixed on her task. "The town hall organizes it every year." A silence stretched between them, dense as the fog that sometimes covered the prairies at dawn. Catherine could feel a question floating in the air, suspended like an unresolved musical note. "Perhaps not," William began. But the store's bell rang when the door opened, and the moment broke like fine crystal. William paid for his order, put his hat back on, and before leaving, looked at Catherine one last time. "Until soon, Miss Thompson." It wasn't a casual goodbye. It was a promise. The town hall had been transformed for the celebration. Red, blue, and white paper garlands hung from the ceiling like patriotic vines, and oil lamps projected dancing shadows on the wooden walls. The local orchestra, composed of a violinist, an accordionist, and an agile-fingered pianist, filled the space with melodies that invited movement. Catherine remained seated next to her mother on one of the side benches, watching the couples spinning in the center of the hall. Her dress, the best she owned, suddenly felt inadequate. She had mended and adjusted it so many times that she doubted anything of the original fabric remained. Mary Thompson leaned toward her daughter, whispering in her ear with the discretion that characterized her public comments. "William Hayes hasn't stopped looking at you since he arrived." Catherine felt her heart skip a beat. She had tried not to look for him among the crowd, convinced that their brief exchange in the store meant nothing to a man like him. But now, discreetly following her mother's gaze, she saw him. William stood by the drinks table, conversing with Sheriff McGraw. Unlike the other ranchers who looked uncomfortable in their Sunday suits, he seemed to wear his formal clothes with the same naturalness with which he wore his usual leather pants and work shirt. And indeed, every few seconds his eyes drifted toward where Catherine was sitting. "Don't talk nonsense, Mother," she replied, though she felt an inexplicable warmth in her cheeks. "Mr. Hayes is just being polite." Mary emitted a sound that could be interpreted as skepticism or amusement. "I've spent enough years observing the men of Dodge City to recognize when one is interested. My daughter. And that man doesn't look at you with simple courtesy." Before Catherine could respond, the music changed to a waltz. And then, as if he had been waiting precisely for that signal, William Hayes crossed the hall with determined steps. The crowd seemed to open before him, creating a direct path to Catherine. "Miss Thompson," he said, bowing slightly, "would you grant me the honor of this dance?" Catherine looked briefly at her mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "It will be a pleasure, Mr. Hayes," she replied, placing her hand over the one he offered. The contact of their palms unleashed an electric current that ran up her arm to nest in her chest. William's hand was warm and rough, marked by years of hard work, but he held hers with a delicacy that contrasted with his robust appearance. As he guided her to the center of the hall, Catherine was painfully conscious of the gazes that followed them. Women whispered behind their fans, men exchanged comments in low voices. Dodge City was a small stage, and they had just become the involuntary protagonists of the play. William gently placed his hand on Catherine's waist, maintaining the appropriate distance dictated by etiquette. They began to move to the rhythm of the waltz, and to Catherine's surprise, he danced with unexpected grace for a man accustomed to ranch life. "I didn't know you danced so well." "Mr. Hayes," Catherine commented, trying to calm the nerves that made her voice tremble. William smiled, and small wrinkles appeared around his eyes. "Like sun rays, my mother insisted I learn. She said a man must know how to dance and cook in case he ever finds himself alone." "Wise woman." "She was," he responded, and a shadow of nostalgia crossed his face. "She died 5 years ago, but I still hear her voice sometimes when the wind blows from the east." Catherine felt something loosen inside her. There was a vulnerability in that confession that moved her. This wasn't the William Hayes of the stories, the unbreakable man everyone admired. He was simply a son who missed his mother. "I'm sorry," she said, and by instinct, she lightly pressed her hand on his shoulder. William looked at her with an intensity that made the rest of the hall seem to fade away. "Do you know what else my mother used to say? That I would recognize the right woman not by her beauty, but by the light in her eyes when she spoke of what she loves." Catherine swallowed. feeling that the conversation was venturing into territory she wasn't prepared for. "And have you found that light, Mr. Hayes?" The music was reaching its end, the last measures floating in the air like autumn leaves. "I think I have, Miss Thompson," he replied, and in his voice there was a certainty that made Catherine feel a sudden vertigo, as if she were at the edge of an unknown precipice. "I think I have." The days following the dance passed in a strange haze for Catherine. She attended to customers, organized merchandise, and kept the store's accounts with the same efficiency as always. But her mind seemed to inhabit a different space, a place where the waltz continued eternally, and William Hayes's words resonated like a persistent echo. William had begun visiting the store more frequently. Sometimes he bought items he clearly didn't need: an embroidered handkerchief, hair ribbons, a jar of mint candies that remained untouched on the counter while they conversed. Other times he simply sat in a chair by the window, watching Catherine work while telling her stories about his ranch, about stars that seemed brighter on summer nights, about a newborn foal he had called Lightning for the white lightning-shaped mark on its forehead. It was during one of those visits, 3 weeks after the dance, when William invited her for a walk along the Arkansas River the following Sunday. "After Mass, my mother wouldn't approve," Catherine had responded instinctively, though Mary Thompson had expressed more than once her admiration for the young rancher. William had looked at her with that mixture of patience and determination that seemed to characterize him. "Then invite your mother too. There's enough room in my carriage for both." And so it was that on that August Sunday, Catherine found herself sitting next to William in a small clearing by the river, while her mother conversed animatedly with Father Collins a few meters away, close enough to maintain appearances, far enough to grant them some privacy. The river flowed with a constant murmur that was hypnotic. Catherine watched the movement of the water, the small ripples that formed around the stones, the dance of light on the surface. There was something comforting in the river's constancy, in its determination to keep moving forward, regardless of obstacles. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" said William, following the direction of her gaze. "It's always seemed to me that water knows something we don't." "What do you mean?" "That it doesn't fight against what it can't change. It simply finds another way." Catherine smiled, surprised by the observation. She didn't expect that kind of reflection from a man like William, accustomed to the practical life of the ranch. "I had never thought of it that way." William took something from his pocket, a small wooden box carved with floral motifs. He opened it carefully and offered it to Catherine. Inside, on a bed of blue velvet, rested a silver brooch in the shape of a rose, with a small ruby in the center. "It belonged to my mother," he explained. "She asked me to give it to the woman who—" He stopped, as if suddenly the words had gotten stuck in his throat. Catherine contemplated the brooch without daring to touch it. It was beautiful, but what paralyzed her was not its beauty, but what it symbolized. "William," it was the first time she used his first name. "What are we doing?" He looked at her with an expression that mixed tenderness and determination. "I think you know, Catherine." "No," she replied, and her voice sounded firmer than she expected. "I don't know. I don't understand why a man like you notices someone like me." "Someone like you?" "Yes, I am—" Catherine searched for the right words. "I'm ordinary, William. I'm not the kind of woman men look at twice. I'm not beautiful like the banker's daughters, nor refined like the teachers who come from the East. I'm the store owner's daughter, with rough hands and a mended dress." William closed the brooch box and put it back in his pocket. Then, with a delicacy that contrasted with his robust appearance, he took Catherine's hands between his. "Catherine Thompson, do you think I don't see who you really are? I see how you treat every person who enters that store, whether it's a wealthy rancher or a laborer who can barely afford a sack of flour. I see how you stay up late keeping the books so your mother can rest. I see the way you listen, really listen, when Widow Johnson comes to tell you her problems." Catherine felt something break inside her. "Like a dam giving way to water pressure. There are things you don't know about me." "William, then tell me." But Catherine couldn't. How could she explain the emptiness she sometimes felt, the sensation of not really belonging anywhere? How could she confess that at 25 she had never felt the warmth of an embrace that wasn't her mother's? How could she tell him that she feared her loneliness was a permanent condition, an invisible mark she carried engraved on her soul? "I can't," she whispered. "I'm sorry. William nodded slowly, and in his eyes there was no disappointment, but an understanding that was almost painful. "When you're ready, I'll be here." "I'm not in a hurry, Catherine. The river always finds its way, remember?" And in that moment, under the August sun that filtered its rays through the tree leaves, Catherine felt something beginning to grow inside her, something fragile and terrifying: hope. The small wooden chapel in Dodge City smelled of cedar and the wildflowers that Mrs. Johnson renewed every week. Catherine knelt in the confessional, feeling the weight of silence like a tangible presence. Through the lattice, she could distinguish Father Collins's profile, a man whose hair had gone grey during the 20 years he had been spiritually guiding the community. "Hail Mary, full of grace," murmured Catherine, following the ritual she had learned since childhood. "The Lord is with thee," responded the priest. "Tell me, daughter, what brings you here today?" Catherine breathed deeply. She hadn't come to confess sins but fears, and although she knew the confessional wasn't the appropriate place for such confidences, she felt that if she didn't speak to someone, the whirlwind of emotions that agitated her would end up drowning her. "Father, I'm afraid," she began, her voice barely audible. "William Hayes has asked me to marry him." The silence from the other side of the lattice told her that Father Collins was as surprised as she had been the night before, when William had appeared at her house with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "And does this fear come from not being sure of your feelings toward him?" the priest finally asked. "No," Catherine replied, and the certainty in her voice surprised her. "I love him, and that's what terrifies me." "I don't understand, daughter." Catherine closed her eyes, searching for words to explain the chaos she felt. "I was never truly loved, Father. Not in the way William says he loves me. I'm still—" She swallowed, feeling her cheeks burn with shame. "I'm still a virgin, not out of virtue, but because no man ever wanted my heart. And I fear that William will discover that I don't know what it is to trust, nor what it is to be desired." What Catherine didn't know was that, on the other side of the chapel, William Hayes had entered looking for Father Collins to finalize the details of the ceremony. He had no intention of listening, but the acoustics of the small church carried Catherine's words to him with painful clarity. "My daughter," Father Collins's voice was soft as a caress, "true love doesn't seek perfection, but authenticity. It doesn't ask you to know how to love perfectly from the beginning, only that you be willing to learn alongside the other person. Are you willing to do that?" Catherine felt a solitary tear roll down her cheek. "Yes, Father, but I have so much to learn." "We all do, Catherine. We all come to love as apprentices." When Catherine left the confessional, she was surprised to find William standing by the altar, conversing in low voices with Father Collins. Something in the way he looked at her told her he had heard her confession. Shame flooded her like a rising tide. "Catherine," William approached her, his voice calm but firm. "Can we talk outside?" The fresh morning air caressed her face when they left the chapel. William guided her to a small stone bench under a centennial elm. They sat in silence, watching the city slowly wake up. "You heard everything, didn't you?" Catherine finally asked, not daring to look at him. Yes. The simplicity of his response disarmed her. There were no excuses, no justifications, just the naked truth. "Then you'll understand why I can't—" she began, but William interrupted her gently. "Catherine, look at me." She raised her eyes, and what she saw in William's face wasn't pity or disappointment, but a quiet determination that left her speechless. "When my father died, he left the ranch almost in ruins. I knew nothing about managing a property, nor about raising cattle. I made mistakes that almost cost me everything. But I learned. Day after day, mistake after mistake, I learned." William took Catherine's hands between his, as he had done by the river. "Love is like that too. Nobody is born knowing everything. You learn by loving, by making mistakes, by trying again. And I want to learn with you, Catherine. I don't care about your inexperience. I care about your willingness to try." Catherine felt something untie inside her, like a knot that finally comes undone after years of tension. "Won't you regret it?" she asked, and her voice sounded small, even to her own ears. William smiled, and in his eyes there was a certainty that was contagious. The only possible regret would be not trying. "Everything else?" "Everything else we'll resolve together. And then," with the first light of dawn bathing Dodge City in golden tones, Catherine did something she had never dared to do before. She leaned forward and kissed William Hayes, sealing with that gesture a promise that went beyond words. The wedding ceremony was simple but beautiful. The small chapel, adorned with wildflowers and white ribbons, was filled to the last bench. All of Dodge City seemed to have gathered to witness the union of William Hayes and Catherine Thompson, a couple that had captured the community's imagination. When Father Collins asked if anyone had any objections, an expectant silence filled the chapel. Catherine, dressed in a wedding dress that had belonged to her mother, modified by Mrs. Johnson's skillful hands, held her breath. A part of her, the part that still didn't believe she deserved this happiness, expected someone to stand up, for something to interrupt this dream before she could wake from it. But then William stepped forward, surprising everyone, including the priest. "I have something to say." His voice resonated clearly in the sacred space. Catherine felt her heart stop. Had he changed his mind? Had he reconsidered his decision? "Catherine fears that I will discover her loneliness," William continued, his eyes fixed on her. "Well, I say before God and all present here, there is no shame in never having been loved. Shame would be pretending love before this altar. But I don't want a farce. I want the truth. And the truth is that I chose you not for what the world denied you, but for what we can build together." A murmur ran through the congregation. Catherine felt tears flowing freely down her cheeks, but for the first time in her life, she didn't try to hide them. William approached her, taking her hands between his. "If you've never been loved..." "Catherine, let me be the first." The chapel erupted in applause. Even Sheriff McGraw, known for his stoicism, discreetly wiped away a tear. Father Collins, visibly moved, continued with the ceremony. And when it came time for the vows, Catherine found a voice she didn't know she possessed. A clear and firm voice that promised love, respect, and companionship until death do them part. The kiss that sealed their marriage was like a new beginning, found dawn after a long night. The subsequent celebration took place in the town hall courtyard, where long tables covered with white tablecloths bent under the weight of stews, cakes and drinks contributed by the entire community. The local orchestra played cheerful melodies, and couples of all ages danced under the blue Kansas sky. Catherine, sitting next to William at the main table, watched the scene with a sense of unreality. Everything seemed too perfect, too beautiful to be true. "What are you thinking about?" asked William, leaning toward her. "That I'm afraid of waking up," Catherine confessed. "That all this is a dream." William took her hand and brought it to his lips, gently kissing her knuckles. "If it's a dream, then we're dreaming together." When the sun began to set, tinting the sky orange and purple, William and Catherine said goodbye to the guests and got into the carriage that would take them to the Hayes Ranch, now their shared home. The journey passed in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by comments about the ceremony or the guests. Catherine felt a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. Soon they would be alone, really alone, and the intimacy that until now had been only a possibility would become reality. The Hayes Ranch finally appeared before them, a solid two-story house with a wide porch, surrounded by stables, corrals, and fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully under the evening light. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes," said William, helping her down from the carriage. Catherine felt the weight of those words, home. Until now, her home had always been the small apartment above the store, shared with her mother. This new space, this new title, Mrs. Hayes, represented such a profound change that she could barely assimilate it. William seemed to read her thoughts, because he added softly, "I know it will take time for it to feel like your home. Don't rush." The house inside was surprisingly cozy. The furniture, though simple, was well cared for, and there were small touches. A vase with wildflowers on the dining room table, lace curtains in the windows that revealed a sensitivity Catherine hadn't expected. "Who?" she began to ask. "Mrs. Johnson and some other women from town," William explained. "So they wanted you to feel welcome." Catherine slowly toured the rooms, familiarizing herself with every corner. The kitchen was spacious and well-equipped. The study had bookshelves full of books, some of which she recognized as her favorites, mentioned in conversations with William. The master bedroom. She stopped at the threshold of that room, suddenly conscious of what it meant. The bed, covered with a patchwork quilt in blue and green tones, seemed to dominate the space. William stopped behind her. Without touching her, "Catherine," he said softly, "there's no hurry for anything. Tonight I could sleep in the guest room if you prefer. She turned to look at him, moved by his consideration but also determined to overcome her fears. "No," she replied. "I want to be with you. I just need time. We have our whole lives," he said, and in his voice there was a promise that gave Catherine the courage she needed. Later, after a simple dinner they shared in the kitchen, after changing privately into the nightgown her mother had included in her trousseau, Catherine found herself lying next to William in the bed they would now share. The darkness was almost complete, except for the silvery moonlight that filtered through the curtains. "May I hold you?" asked William, his voice barely a whisper in the night. Catherine nodded, unable to speak, and felt her husband's arms surround her with infinite delicacy. The warmth of his body, the rhythmic sound of his breathing, the solidity of his presence, all of it created a sensation of security that Catherine had never experienced. "Good night, my wife," murmured William against her hair. "Good night." "Husband," she replied, and for the first time in a long time, Catherine felt she belonged somewhere, that she had found her home not in a building, but in the arms of this man who loved her just as she was. The first rays of sun found Catherine awake, watching William's sleeping face. In sleep his features softened, losing the determination that characterized him when awake. A strand of brown hair fell over his forehead, and she resisted the impulse to brush it away with her fingers. The night before, after that first embrace, they had talked in whispers for hours. William had told her stories of his childhood on the ranch, of summers helping his father with the cattle, of winters by the fire while his mother read aloud passages from the Bible and the few books they owned. Catherine, in turn, had shared memories of her father before his death, of how he taught her to keep the store's accounts, of Sundays fishing together at the river. They hadn't made love. William hadn't tried, and she, though nervous, had felt strangely disappointed. Didn't he desire her, or was he simply respecting her inexperience? As if sensing her gaze, William opened his eyes. For a moment he seemed disoriented, and then a slow smile illuminated his face. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice still hoarse from sleep. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she replied, surprised by how easily the words came from her lips, as if they had repeated this exchange hundreds of times. William sat up, leaning on an elbow to look at her better. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Catherine confessed, "though I woke up several times. Everything is different." "I know," he nodded. "But different can be good, don't you think?" Before she could answer, a sound came from downstairs, someone knocking on the front door with insistent knocks. William frowned. "It's very early for visitors," he murmured, getting up and quickly putting on his pants and a shirt. "Wait here." Catherine heard him go downstairs and open the door. Male voices, too low to distinguish the words. Then hurried footsteps back to the room. "It's Robert, my foreman, Willie," I'm explained while getting fully dressed. "One of the bulls has broken through the north fence and taken part of the herd with him. I have to go." Catherine nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. She knew the ranch would demand William's attention, but she hadn't expected it to happen so soon on their first morning as a married couple. "Of course," she said. "Go." William leaned down to kiss her briefly on the lips. "I'm sorry. I'll be back as soon as I can." And so Catherine found herself alone in that unknown house, feeling a strange mixture of relief and abandonment. She dressed slowly, exploring the closet where her few belongings had been arranged next to William's clothes. The intimacy of that sight, her dresses next to his shirts, her stockings next to his socks, moved her in a way she hadn't expected. She went down to the kitchen, where she found enough provisions to prepare breakfast. While lighting the stove, she wondered what she would do during the day. In the store there were always tasks to complete, customers to attend, merchandise to organize. Here in this house too big for one person alone, what was expected of her? The answer came shortly after noon, when William returned, exhausted but satisfied. The bull and cattle had been recovered, the fence repaired. "Are you hungry?" asked Catherine, surprised by how natural it felt to ask that question. "Very," he replied, washing his hands in the kitchen sink. They ate in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind of silence that exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with words. When they finished, William looked at her with a serious expression. "Catherine, there's something we need to discuss." She felt her heart speed up. Had he already regretted it? Had he discovered she wasn't the wife he expected? "Your mother and I talked before the wedding," William continued. "She's willing to sell us the store if you want to keep running it." Catherine blinked, surprised. It wasn't what she expected. "The store?" "Yes, Mary is thinking of moving with her sister in Topeka. She says it's time to rest. But she doesn't want to sell the business to strangers, not after everything you and she have built." "But how could I manage the store living here? It's almost an hour's journey." William smiled as if he had been waiting for that question. "I have a proposal. We could build a small store here at the ranch. Many of the workers from nearby farms have to travel to Dodge City to get supplies. A store here would save them time and give us additional income." Catherine looked at him astonished. William had thought of everything, had found a way to respect her independence, her need to feel useful. "Would you do that for me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I would do anything to see you happy, Catherine," he replied simply. "Besides, you're an excellent merchant. It would be a waste not to use that talent." Something expanded in Catherine's chest, a warm sensation that seemed to fill all the empty spaces that loneliness had left in her. "I love you," she said, and the words came from her lips without thinking. Like water from a newly discovered spring. William looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "Say it again," he asked. "I love you." "William Hayes," Catherine said louder this time, marveling at the certainty she felt. "I love you." William got up from the table and walked around to where she sat, with a gentleness that contrasted with his physical strength. He lifted her from the chair and kissed her, a kiss that contained everything words couldn't express. When they separated, both breathing heavily, William rested his forehead against hers. "I've waited so long to hear you say that," Catherine smiled, feeling a freedom she had never experienced before. "I think I've also waited my whole life to be able to say it." And so, in that kitchen bathed in midday light, Catherine understood that love wasn't an unknown territory to fear, but a territory to discover together, step by step, day by day. Autumn arrived in Kansas with its palette of reds and golds, transforming the prairies into an undulating sea of warm colors. Catherine and William had fallen into a comfortable routine during the 2 months they had been married. He would get up at dawn to supervise the ranch work, while she prepared breakfast and organized household tasks. In the afternoons, when William returned, they shared the day's stories during dinner, and then spent the hours before sleep, reading by the fire or simply conversing. The construction of the small ranch store had begun, and each day Catherine saw how the walls rose a little higher, how her new project took literal shape before her eyes. It was a strange and wonderful sensation, that of building something of her own, something that combined her past with her present. That October morning, Catherine was in the kitchen preparing apple preserves when she heard the sound of a carriage approaching. They weren't expecting visitors, and William was in the north field with the Cowboys, supervising the cattle separation before winter. Looking through the window, she recognized the elegant carriage of the Montgomerys, one of Dodge City's wealthiest families. Eleanor Montgomery, with her eternal expression of someone who had smelled something unpleasant, descended with her husband's help, banker George Montgomery. Catherine hurried to remove her apple-stained apron and smooth her hair before opening the door. "Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery, what a surprise," she greeted, trying to keep her voice from revealing her unease. The Montgomerys rarely left the city limits and had never shown interest in visiting the Hayes Ranch. "Catherine, dear," Eleanor replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We hope we're not interrupting." "Not at all," Catherine lied, inviting them in. "Please come in. I was preparing tea." It wasn't true, but she needed a few minutes to compose herself. While putting water to boil, she heard the Montgomerys moving through the living room, their murmurs barely audible. When she returned with the tea tray, she found them examining the family photographs that adorned the mantelpiece. "You have a charming house," commented George Montgomery, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Very rustic." Catherine smiled tensely while serving the tea. "Thank you. William and I are very happy here." Eleanor took her cup with 2 fingers, as if she feared contamination. "I must admit we were very surprised by your marriage, dear. It was all so sudden." Catherine felt herself tense. It was true that their engagement and wedding had occurred within the space of a few weeks, but that wasn't unusual in Dodge City, where life could be unpredictable, and opportunities had to be seized when they presented themselves. When one finds the right person, Mrs. Montgomery, time seems irrelevant, Eleanor exchanged a glance with her husband. Of course. It's just that, well, William Hayes was always considered one of the region's most coveted bachelors. How Charlotte was certain he was going to declare his intentions to her at the July 4th dance. So that was it. Charlotte Montgomery, the couple's youngest daughter, had made her admiration for William clear on numerous occasions. Catherine remembered seeing her at the dance, beautiful in her imported silk dress, watching William with expectant eyes. "I'm sorry for Charlotte's disappointment," Catherine replied with all the dignity she could muster. "But William made his intentions toward me very clear." George Montgomery cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We haven't come to discuss the past, Catherine. Actually, we wanted to talk business with William. Is he around?" "He's in the Northfield with the Cowboys. He won't be back until evening." "I see," the banker frowned. "Well, perhaps you can give him our message. We're interested in buying part of his lands, specifically the section that borders the river. The railroad is planning an expansion, and that area would be ideal for a new station." Catherine felt a chill run down her back. The river section was the ranch's most fertile, where cattle grazed during the driest months of the year. Losing it would mean a devastating blow to the ranch's economy. "I don't think William would be interested in selling those lands, Mr. Montgomery," she replied firmly. "They're essential to the ranch." Eleanor let out a little laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Oh dear, we don't expect you to understand business. This is something men must discuss." Catherine felt her blood boil in her veins. For years she had kept the Thompson store's accounts, negotiating with suppliers and calculating profit margins. She understood business better than many men in Dodge City, including, she suspected, George Montgomery, whose bank had been saved from bankruptcy by Kansas City investors the previous year. "Mrs. Montgomery," she said, keeping her voice controlled, "I assure you I perfectly understand the implications of your offer. And as William's wife and partner in this ranch, I can tell you we're not interested in selling any part of our property." The Montgomerys looked at her with evident surprise. Clearly they had expected to find a decorative wife, not William's equal in decision-making. "I see that married life has given you confidence," Eleanor commented, putting her cup on the table with a yes, harp tap. "However, we insist on speaking directly with William. The railroad won't wait forever, and it would be a shame for this opportunity to pass by." Catherine stood up, indicating the visit had ended. "I'll give him your message, but I assure you his answer will be the same as mine." The Montgomerys left shortly after, leaving behind a silence charged with tension. Catherine remained on the porch, watching the elegant carriage disappear, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. When William returned at evening, Catherine told him about the visit and the offer. Her husband listened in silence, his face growing increasingly somber. "It's not the first time they've tried to buy that land," he finally said. "Last year, before I met you, George Montgomery approached me with a similar offer. I rejected it then and I reject it now." Catherine felt a wave of relief. "That's what I told them. But I wasn't sure if I was speaking correctly for you." William took her hands between his, a gesture that had become part of the silent language they had developed. "Catherine, you are my wife and my partner. Your decisions about this land are as valid as mine. Never doubt that." She nodded. But something in her expression must have revealed that the Montgomerys' visit had affected her more than she wanted to admit. "What else did they say?" asked William, knowing Eleanor Montgomery and her sharp tongue too well. Catherine hesitated. She didn't want to create unnecessary conflicts, but she also didn't want secrets between them. "They mentioned Charlotte. They insinuated that she expected you, well, that you would propose to her." To her surprise, William laughed out loud. "Charlotte Montgomery? The same one who once said she'd rather marry a coyote than live on a ranch." The tension Catherine had accumulated all day began to dissipate. "So you were never interested in her?" William looked at her with that intensity that still gave her chills. "Catherine Hayes, from the moment I really saw you in the store that day, surrounded by nails and tools, with dirt on your hands, and that concentration wrinkle between your eyebrows, I knew there would be no other woman for me." Catherine felt her eyes fill with tears. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a joy so deep it almost hurt. "I love you," she said simply, because those two words contained everything she needed to express. William drew her to him and kissed her with a mixture of tenderness and passion that had characterized their physical relationship since the night, 2 weeks after the wedding, when they had finally consummated their marriage. That night, Catherine had discovered that desire wasn't something to fear, but another language to share, another form of communication between two people who loved each other. "And I love you," he replied against her lips, more than words can express. Outside, the autumn wind whispered through the trees, tearing away golden leaves that danced in the air like small promises of a future that, despite whatever storms might come, they would face together. Winter fell over Kansas with its white mantle, transforming the landscape into a silent expanse where trees stood like dark sentinels against the pale sky. For Catherine, these first months at the ranch had been a period of adaptation and discovery, not only of her new life as a wife, but also of capabilities she didn't know she possessed. The small store next to the ranch was almost finished. Catherine had personally supervised the arrangement of shelves, the organization of space, the list of products they would offer. William had watched with silent pride as she negotiated with suppliers, calculated prices, and established relationships with surrounding families. That December morning, while William was in Dodge City collecting supplies, Catherine found herself in the house's attic, exploring trunks and boxes that contained the Hayes family history. William had given her permission to reorganize whatever she wanted, to make that house built by generations of Hayeses a home for her as well, among hand-woven blankets, yellowed letters and utensils whose purpose no one remembered. Catherine found a small carved wooden box. She recognized it immediately. It was identical to the one that contained the brooch William had shown her by the river, the day he tried, for the first time, to express his feelings. With trembling hands, Catherine opened the box. Inside there were no jewels, but something even more personal, a small worn leather notebook. Upon opening it, she discovered it was a diary. Written in elegant handwriting she supposed belonged to William's mother. She shouldn't read it. It was an invasion of a woman's privacy whom she had never known, of memories that didn't belong to her. But when her eyes caught William's name on one of the pages, curiosity was stronger. "William turned 10 today," the entry said. "We gave him his first horse, a young colt he chose himself. He named him Thunder, for the dark mark on his forehead that looks like a storm cloud. Edward says he's too young for his own horse, but I see in my son's eyes the same determination I saw in his father's when I met him. William is not like other children. There's a depth in him, a way of looking at the world that reminds me of a clear water well, calm on the surface, but with powerful currents in the depths." Catherine turned the pages, jumping to later entries. The diary covered years, documenting William's growth from child to young man. William returned today from town with a poetry book. He says the teacher lent it to him, that there are words there that describe what he feels when he rides alone across the prairies. Edward laughed and said no son of his would be a dreamer. But I see something beautiful in this interest. The world needs men who know how to appreciate beauty alongside strength. Catherine felt a knot in her throat. This diary revealed a William she was just beginning to know, a man whose external strength hid a sensitivity he only allowed himself to show in rare moments of intimacy. The last entry was dated a few weeks before Margaret Hayes's death, according to what Catherine remembered from what William had told her. "I fear I don't have much time left. The illness advances, and each day it's harder for me to get out of bed. Edward pretends not to see the obvious, and William, my dear William, has taken on so many responsibilities. Too many for a 25-year-old young man. I worry that when I'm gone, he'll close himself off even more, that he'll forget that life isn't just work and duty. I've asked him to find someone who loves the land like he does, but who also loves books, music, the small daily beauties. Someone who sees in him not just the respected rancher, but also the child who asked me why stars don't fall from the sky. I leave in this box my mother's brooch, so that one day he can give it to that special woman. And alongside it, this diary, so she can know the man I've had the privilege of watching grow." Tears flowed freely down Catherine's cheeks when she closed the diary. She felt as if Margaret Hayes had spoken directly to her through time, entrusting her not only with her son, but also with a mission, to keep alive that part of William that the world rarely saw. So absorbed was she in her thoughts that she didn't hear footsteps on the attic stairs. When William's voice sounded behind her, she jumped with surprise. "You found my mother's diary." It wasn't a question, nor was there accusation in his voice. Catherine turned toward him, still holding the small book between her hands. "I'm sorry," she said, drying her tears with the back of her hand. I shouldn't have read it. William approached slowly and sat next to her on the dusty attic floor. He took the diary carefully, like someone holding something infinitely fragile. My father never knew of its existence, he said, turning the pages with reverence. Or if he knew, he never mentioned it. I found it after her death, when I was going through her belongings. Catherine observed her husband's profile, the firm line of his jaw, the shadow of beard that darkened his cheek. She wanted to embrace him, tell him she understood, that she saw in him everything his mother had seen and more. She loved you very much, she finally said. William nodded, a sad smile curving his lips. She was an extraordinary woman, strong as steel when necessary, but also capable of seeing beauty where others only saw utility. Catherine thought about the diary entries, about how they portrayed a William very different from the man Dodge City knew. She wrote that you wanted to be a poet. William let out a soft, almost embarrassed laugh. For a time. There was a teacher at school, Mr. Thompson, who lent me books. Wordsworth, Whitman, Tennyson. It seemed magical how they could capture with words what I felt when I rode alone across the prairies at dawn. What happened to that dream? William closed the diary and returned it to its box. Life happened. My father got sick, then my mother. The ranch needed a man, not a dreamer. Catherine took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. Maybe it can have both. William looked at her with an intensity that took her breath away. Both? A man and a dreamer, she replied. A respected rancher who also reads poetry by the fire. A strong husband who isn't afraid to show tenderness. Eh? Complete William Hayes. Something changed in William's face, as if a long-held tension began to loosen. For years I tried to be what everyone expected. The perfect son, the successful rancher, the shrewd businessman. Only with my mother could I be simply me. Catherine moved closer to him until their shoulders touched. With me you can also be simply you, William. All of your yous. William looked at her for a long time, as if memorizing every detail of her face. The last time I spoke with my mother, he finally said, she made me promise I wouldn't settle for less than true love, that I would wait for someone who would really see me, not just the image I project. I think she was waiting for you, Catherine. Catherine felt something expand inside her, a happiness so intense it almost hurt. And I for you, she replied. Though I didn't know it. William took the diary and offered it to her. I want you to have it, not as a burden from the past, but as a bridge to the future, a reminder that true love sees all our facets and accepts them. Catherine accepted the diary, recognizing the value of the gift. It wasn't just an object, it was a trust, an open door to William's soul. I'll treasure it, she promised, and so in that dusty attic, under the winter light that filtered through a small window, Catherine and William sealed a new level of intimacy, one based not only on present love, but also on understanding of the past that had shaped them. The diary became a talisman for Catherine, a tangible reminder that true love doesn't erase our individual stories, but weaves them into a shared narrative, richer and more complex than any they could create separately. Spring arrived in Kansas with an explosion of life. The prairies were covered with wildflowers, trees dressed in new leaves, and the Hayes Ranch store finally opened its doors. The inauguration was a modest but significant event. Families from nearby ranches gathered to see the new establishment, attracted by both curiosity and the reputation for honesty Catherine had inherited from her mother. For Catherine, seeing the store functioning, hearing the bells tinkle every time the door opened, was like recovering a part of herself she feared she had lost upon marrying. Not that she didn't love her life with William. Every day she discovered new reasons to love him, but the independence that commerce gave her was a natural extension of her identity. One April afternoon, while Catherine was organizing a new shipment of fabrics arrived from St. Louis, the bell rang announcing a customer. Looking up, she encountered a woman she didn't recognize, thin to the point of fragility, with a worn but clean dress and eyes that seemed to have seen too much. "Good afternoon," Catherine greeted, leaving the fabrics on the counter. "Welcome to Hayes' store. How may I help you?" The woman, who could be about 30 years old though she appeared older, looked around with evident nervousness. "I'm looking for work," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "They told me in Dodge City that perhaps here." Catherine observed her more carefully. There was something in the way the woman held herself, slightly hunched as if expecting a blow, that awakened an instinctive alarm in her. "Do you have experience in commerce?" she asked gently. "I worked in a haberdashery in Wichita for 3 years," the woman replied, gaining some confidence. "I know basic bookkeeping and I'm good with fabrics." Catherine nodded slowly. The truth was she could use help. The store attracted more and more customers, and dividing her time between the shop and household responsibilities was exhausting. "What is your name?" Emma Wilson. "I'm Catherine Hayes. Are you—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Are you established in the area, Mrs. Wilson?" Emma looked down, fixing her gaze on her hands that kept twisting the frayed edge of her shawl. "I arrived 3 days ago. I'm renting a room at Widow Peterson's house, about 2 kilometers from here." Catherine knew Widow Peterson, a kind woman who occasionally rented rooms to travelers. That she had accepted Emma as a tenant spoke well of her. "The store is still beginning," Catherine explained. "I can't offer a very high salary, but it would be fair. And the hours would be from morning until mid-afternoon, 6 days a week." For the first time, a genuine smile illuminated Emma's face, completely transforming it. "That would be perfect, Mrs. Hayes. Perfect." And so, Emma Wilson became the first employee of Hayes' store. During the following weeks, Catherine discovered that Emma was not only competent, but also dedicated. She had a special eye for product presentation and a natural ability to anticipate customers' needs. What she didn't mention was her past. Every time the conversation approached personal topics, Emma skillfully changed the subject or excused herself to attend to some task. Catherine respected her privacy, but couldn't help wondering what story was hidden behind those eyes that sometimes got lost in the distance, full of a sadness that seemed too heavy for her fragile shoulders. One afternoon, while they were closing the store, William appeared unexpectedly. He had been in Dodge City most of the day, negotiating the sale of cattle. "Good afternoon, ladies," he greeted, removing his hat as he entered. Catherine immediately noticed how Emma tensed, how her whole body seemed to shrink at the male presence. It was a reaction she had observed before, but never so pronounced. "William, this is Emma Wilson, my assistant," Catherine introduced. "Emma, my husband, William Hayes." William approached with his usual smile, extending his hand. Emma took it briefly, withdrawing it almost immediately. "A pleasure to meet you." "Mr. Hayes," she murmured, not completely raising her gaze. "The pleasure is mine. Mrs. Wilson, Catherine has told me a lot about you and your excellent work." Emma nodded, murmuring something about finishing organizing the store, and retreated to the back room. William looked at Catherine with a silent question in his eyes. "She's shy," Catherine explained, though she knew it was much more than that. That night after dinner, while William read by the fire, and Catherine sewed a button on one of his shirts, she decided to share her concerns. "I think Emma has suffered abuse," she said without preamble, for that was their communication with William. Direct. "Honest?" William lowered his book, all his attention concentrated on her. "Did she tell you?" "No, but there are signs." The way she startles at loud noises. How she tenses when a man enters the store. The marks on her wrists, which she tries to hide with long sleeves even on hot days. William nodded gravely. "Do you think she's in danger?" "I don't know. She says she comes from Wichita, but doesn't talk about family or a husband. I think she's running from something or someone." Catherine left her sewing in her lap, looking at her husband intently. "William, I know it's not our business, but I can't help worrying about her." William got up from his chair and sat next to Catherine on the sofa, taking her hands between his. "Your compassion is one of the reasons I love you," he said softly. "And if you want to help her, I'll support you." Catherine rested her head on William's shoulder, grateful to have a partner who understood her heart without need for long explanations. "I don't know how to help her if she doesn't trust me enough to tell me her story." "Trust takes time, Catherine, especially for someone who has been betrayed." Catherine thought about her own insecurities, about how she had feared opening her heart to William, feared not being worthy of love. But her fear seemed trivial compared to what she suspected Emma had lived through. "What can I do?" "Be patient. Continue being a safe space, and when the time comes, listen without judging." The moment came a week later, during a violent storm that lashed the region. The sky darkened at noon, as if night had decided to advance, and lightning tore the horizon, while thunder made the store windows tremble. Emma, who was inventorying merchandise, dropped a jar on the floor when a particularly loud thunder rumbled over the building. The glass shattered, scattering coffee across the wooden floor. "I'm sorry," she stammered, immediately kneeling to pick up the fragments. "I'm so sorry, I'll pay for it, please don't." Her hands trembled so much that she cut herself on a piece of glass. Blood stained the floor, mixing with the spilled coffee. Catherine knelt next to her, gently taking her hands to examine the cut. "Emma, it's okay. It's just a jar, and the wound isn't deep." But Emma didn't seem to hear her. Her eyes were unfocused, looking at something Catherine couldn't see. "He always got angry when I broke something," she murmured, as if talking to herself. "He said I was clumsy on purpose to provoke him." Catherine felt her heart contract. "Who, Emma? Who got angry?" "My husband," she replied, and it was as if a floodgate had opened. "Robert Wilson. We married 6 years ago in Wichita. At first he was kind, or so I thought, but then he started drinking, and when he drank—" Catherine helped her stand up and guided her to a chair. Outside, the storm continued, but inside the store time seemed to have stopped. "The first time he hit me, he swore he would never do it again," Emma continued, her voice monotonous, as if reading a story that didn't belong to her. "He cried, asked for forgiveness, bought me a new dress. I believed him. I wanted to believe him." Catherine remained silent, allowing Emma to unroll the skein of her pain at her own pace, but it kept happening. Each time worse, each time with less remorse. "Until one night," her voice broke. "One night I thought he was going to kill me. I saw it in his eyes. And the next day, when he left for work, I took what little I could carry with me and got on the first train leaving Wichita." "You did the right thing, Emma," Catherine said softly. "You were brave." Emma raised her gaze, and in her eyes there was a mixture of shame and defiance. "Don't you think I should have been a better wife?" "That may be if I hadn't provoked him." "No," Catherine interrupted firmly. "Never think that. No one deserves to be treated like that." "No one?" The rain pounded the windows furiously, creating a backdrop for this long-awaited confession. "I'm afraid he'll find me," Emma whispered. "If he finds me—" "He won't." The security in Catherine's voice surprised even herself. "And if he tries, you're not alone. You have me, William, this entire community." Emma looked at her with such fragile hope that Catherine felt her heart breaking. "Why would you help me like this?" "You barely know me." Catherine thought about her own life, about how William's love had transformed her vision of herself, had healed wounds she didn't even know she had, because we all deserve the opportunity to heal. "Emma, we all deserve a second chance." And while the storm began to calm inside the store, two different women, united by understanding of pain and hope for healing, shared a moment of truth that would change both lives forever. Summer stretched over Kansas like a golden blanket, warming the earth and ripening the crops. For Catherine, the months following Emma's confession were a period of learning and growth. She watched how her employee, now friend, slowly began to rebuild herself, to straighten her shoulders, to smile more frequently. It was like watching a withered flower gradually recovering its color and form under proper care. The store prospered. News of fair prices and honest treatment had spread throughout the region, attracting customers even from Dodge City. William had expanded the building, adding a small annex where Catherine offered tea and coffee to customers who arrived after long journeys. One July morning, while Catherine worked in the garden, she had begun next to the house. She heard the sound of hooves approaching. Looking up, she saw William returning from Dodge City, where he had gone to collect mail and provisions. His normally serene face showed unusual tension. "What's wrong?" asked Catherine, removing her gardening gloves and cleaning the dirt from her hands on her apron. William dismounted and tied his horse to the nearby post. "A man has arrived in Dodge City," he said, his voice low but urgent. "He's asking about a woman who fits Emma's description. He says he's her husband." Catherine felt the ground move under her feet. "Robert Wilson?" That's how he introduced himself. He's been at the sheriff's office, claiming his wife escaped taking money and jewels. McGraw doesn't quite believe him, but he's obligated to investigate. Catherine closed her eyes for a moment, trying to control the panic growing inside her. "Is he coming here?" "I don't think so, at least not today. When I left town, he was at the saloon, quite drunk already. But he'll find this place eventually. Dodge City isn't that big and people talk." Catherine nodded, making an immediate decision. "I must warn Emma. Today is her day off." "But she lives so close." "I'll go with you," said William. But Catherine shook her head. "It would be better if I go alone." A man's presence might scare her, especially after this news. William seemed to want to protest, but finally nodded. "Be careful. That man. There's something in his look I don't like." Catherine mounted her mare, Daisy, a gift from William on their first wedding anniversary. The journey to Widow Peterson's house was short. Barely 15 minutes on horseback through fields now golden with ripe wheat. Widow Peterson received her with her usual kindness, though her face showed concern when Catherine asked about Emma. "She left early this morning," the old woman informed. "Said she was going to pick wildflowers in the prairie near the creek." Catherine knew the place. It was a small valley where flowers grew in profusion, protected from the wind by gentle hills. She often went there herself to pick flowers for the house. She found Emma sitting by the creek, braiding a crown of daisies and blue bellflowers. Seeing Catherine, she smiled, but her smile faded upon noticing her friend's grave expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting aside her work. Catherine dismounted and sat next to her on the grass. There was no sense in softening the news. "Robert is in Dodge City, Emma. He's asking about you." Emma's face paled so much that for a moment Catherine feared she might faint. "How did he find me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the creek's murmur. "I don't know. But he's here and he's saying you ran away with his money and jewels." Emma let out a bitter laugh devoid of humor. "Money? He barely left me enough for food. Jewels? The few I had he sold to drink." Catherine took her hands, noticing they were cold despite the day's heat. "Emma, you must come with us. You can't stay at Widow Peterson's house. It's the first thing he'll find out." Emma shook her head, her gaze lost in the water flowing between the stones. "I can't involve you more. You've already done too much for me." "It's not a bother, Emma. We have a free room in the house. You'll be safe there." "And then what?" Emma's voice broke. "Run away again? Keep running the rest of my life?" Catherine remained silent. She didn't have an answer to that question. The law offered little protection to women in situations like Emma's. A husband had almost absolute rights over his wife, and although Sheriff McGraw was a fair man, he was limited by the laws he had sworn to enforce. "I don't have all the answers," she finally admitted, "but I know that together we'll find a solution. For now, the important thing is keeping you safe." Emma nodded slowly, as if each movement required conscious effort. All right. They returned together to the ranch, where William waited for them on the porch. He had prepared the guest room and was heating soup in the kitchen. His simple but considerate gestures brought tears to Emma's eyes. "Thank you," she said, looking at both William and Catherine. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "There's nothing to repay," William replied with that quiet firmness that characterized him. "It's what any decent person would do." That night, after Emma retired to rest, Catherine and William remained by the fire, discussing options in low voices. "We could send her further west," William suggested. "I have a cousin in Colorado who could help her get established." Catherine considered the idea, but something in her resisted. What if we don't want her to run anymore? What if we want her to be able to stay here, build a life without fear? William looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. "Catherine, you know there's little we can do legally. If he insists she return with him, then we'll have to find another solution," Catherine interrupted. "One that involves neither the law nor flight." The determination in her voice surprised even herself. In recent years, since her marriage to William, something had changed inside her. The insecure young woman who feared not being worthy of love had transformed into a woman who not only accepted her own worth, but was willing to fight for others. "You have an idea?" It wasn't a question. William had learned to read his wife's expressions as well as she read his. "Maybe," Catherine replied, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "But I'll need your help." During the following days, while Emma remained relatively safe at the ranch, Catherine put her plan into motion. First, she visited Pastor Collins in Dodge City, bringing with her the diary Emma had begun writing at Catherine's suggestion, documenting the abuse suffered. The elderly priest read the pages in silence, his face growing increasingly somber. "This is," he began, but words seemed to fail him. "The truth," Catherine completed. "A truth many prefer to ignore." Father Collins nodded slowly. "What can I do to help?" Catherine explained her plan. It wasn't perfect, involved risks, but it was better than the alternative of seeing Emma return to a life of abuse or condemning her to a life of constant flight. Then she visited Sheriff McGraw, a man who had known her father and had always shown respect for the Thompson family. She told him an edited version of Emma's story. Enough to sow doubts about Robert Wilson's accusations. Finally, with William's help, she met with several influential women in the community, the doctor's wife, the school teacher, even Eleanor Montgomery, whose initial animosity toward Catherine had transformed into reluctant respect over time. A week after Robert Wilson's arrival in Dodge City, Catherine knew the man had finally discovered his wife's whereabouts. She saw him from the store window, a man of robust constitution with a F.A.C. reddened by alcohol and anger, riding toward the Hayes Ranch with evident determination. Catherine breathed deeply, smoothed her dress, and went out to the porch to face him. "Mr. Wilson," she greeted with a calm she didn't feel. "We were expecting you." Robert Wilson stopped his horse, clearly surprised by the reception. "Where is my wife?" he demanded, his hoarse voice revealing hours of drinking. "Mrs. Wilson is inside," Catherine replied. "But before you see her, there are some people who want to talk to you." As if it were a signal, the store door opened, and from it emerged Father Collins, Sheriff McGraw, Dr. Thompson and his wife, the school teacher, and to Catherine's surprise, Helena and George Montgomery. Robert Wilson's face went from surprise to anger. "What is this? Some kind of trial?" "No, Mr. Wilson," Sheriff McGraw replied. "Simply a conversation we believe necessary." Catherine watched as the man who had terrorized Emma for years now faced a united community. She saw how his initial bravado gave way to uncertainty. When Father Collins spoke of a husband's responsibilities, when Dr. Thompson casually mentioned wounds he had treated in women in the region, when Eleanor Montgomery made it clear that no respectable merchant in Dodge City would do business with a man known to abuse his wife. It wasn't a violent confrontation. There were no explicit threats. It was something more subtle and perhaps more powerful. It was a community establishing its own rules, its own standards of behavior. When Emma finally came out, accompanied by William, she was no longer the frightened woman who trembled at the mere mention of her husband. She stood straight, with the dignity of one who has touched bottom and begun the long ascent toward the light. "Robert," she said, her voice clear in the expectant silence, "I want a divorce." The man let out an incredulous laugh. "You can't divorce me. The law is on my side." "Perhaps," George Montgomery intervened, to everyone's surprise. "But there's more than law at stake here. There are reputations. There are businesses. There's a future in this community, or the lack of it." The banker took an envelope from his jacket and handed it to Robert Wilson. "Here's enough money for a new beginning, somewhere far from here. In exchange, you'll sign these papers renouncing any claim over Mrs. Wilson and agreeing never to return to this region." Robert Wilson looked at the envelope, then at the determined faces surrounding him, and finally at his wife. What he saw there in eyes that had once been full of fear seemed to finally break something in him. "Go to hell," he muttered, but took the envelope and the papers. Catherine exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't a perfect victory. It wasn't complete justice, but it was a beginning. It was an open door to a future where Emma could heal, could trust again, could perhaps even love again. And as she watched the community that had united to protect one of their own, Catherine understood that true love isn't limited to the relationship between two people. Sometimes it's a broader garden, where many voices whisper words of support, where many hands extend to hold up those who fall, where complicit silence gives way to shared action. A garden that, like the one she cultivated next to the house, required constant care, but offered fruit sweeter than anyone could imagine. Autumn brought winds that carried golden leaves and news that changed the rhythm of life at the Hayes Ranch. Emma, finally freed from the shadow of her past, had decided to accept Widow Johnson's offer to buy half of her haberdashery in Dodge City. It was a bold step, a leap of faith toward an independence that had once seemed impossible. For Catherine, Emma's departure from the ranch store was bittersweet. They had developed a deep friendship, an understanding that went beyond words, but she also felt an almost maternal pride in seeing her friend take the reins of her life. The last afternoon Emma worked at the store. Both women shared tea in the small annex, while rain gently tapped against the windows. "I'll never be able to thank you enough," said Emma, her fingers playing with the edge of her cup. "Not just for helping me with Robert, but for showing me I could be more than what he made me believe I was." Catherine smiled, recognizing in those words an echo of her own journey. "I didn't do anything you hadn't already done, Emma. The courage was always in you. You just needed a safe space to recognize it." Emma watched the rain, her face serene, reflecting a peace that had been hard-won. "You know, for years I feared rainy days. Robert always drank more when it rained, and that meant—" She left the sentence incomplete, but Catherine understood. "Now, when it rains, I think of this afternoon, of this tea, of this friendship. I'm rebuilding my memories one day at a time." Catherine extended her hand across the table, taking Emma's between hers. That's exactly what healing means. When Emma left, Catherine remained in the empty store, listening to the rain's patter and thinking about how life weaves its patterns, how wounds can become strengths, how endings are sometimes just new beginnings in disguise. That night, while preparing dinner, she felt a wave of nausea so sudden and intense that she had to sit down to recover her breath. It wasn't the first time in recent weeks, but she had been too busy with the store and with Emma to pay attention to it. William found her like that, pale and with her forehead beaded with sweat, when he returned from checking the cattle. "Catherine," the alarm in his voice was evident as he knelt next to her. "What's wrong?" She tried to smile to downplay it. "It's nothing, just a passing dizziness." But William wasn't fooled. With the quiet determination that characterized him, he insisted she rest while he finished preparing dinner. Later, when he helped her up the stairs to their bedroom, Catherine stopped halfway, a sudden realization illuminating her mind like lightning. "William," she said, turning toward him, I think I'm pregnant." William's face transformed, going from concern to surprise and then to a joy so pure and complete that Catherine felt her heart expand just from witnessing it. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Not completely," she admitted, "but it's been almost 2 months since my last period, and these dizzy spells, the fatigue." William embraced her with such delicacy as if she were made of crystal, his large body enveloping her in a cocoon of warmth and protection. "A child," he murmured against her hair. "Our child." Catherine felt a mixture of emotions so intense that tears flowed without warning. Joy, of course, but also fear. Would she be a good mother? Would she know how to love this little being now growing inside her? As if reading her thoughts, William took Catherine's face between his hands with infinite tenderness. "You'll be a wonderful mother," he said with conviction. "You have so much love to give, Catherine." She rested her forehead against William's chest, letting the constant rhythm of his heart calm her fears. "I'm afraid," she confessed in a whisper. "I didn't have a mother's example for long. Mine died when I was so young. And yet you became this extraordinary woman," he replied. "Besides, you won't be alone. We'll be together in this as in everything else." That night, while rain continued its melodic song over the roof, Catherine lay next to William, their hands joined over her still flat belly, where the promise of a new life grew. The sound of rain, which had once meant loneliness to her, now whispered stories of family, of continuity, of love that expands in ever wider circles. "If it's a girl," murmured William, already half asleep, "I'd like her to be called Margaret, like my mother. And if it's a boy," Catherine replied, "he could be called James, like my father." Sleep found them like that, dreaming of a future that, though uncertain like all futures, was full of luminous possibilities. The confirmation of her pregnancy came a few weeks later, when Dr. Thompson visited the ranch for his usual rounds of the properties distant from Dodge City. His smile upon completing Catherine's examination dispelled any doubt. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hayes. I expect you to be ready to welcome a new family member in early spring." The following months passed in a whirlwind of preparations. William transformed one of the empty rooms into a nursery, building with his own hands a cherry wood crib that he polished until it shone with a warm, reddish tone. Catherine sewed blankets and small garments, each stitch imbued with dreams and hopes. The ranch store continued functioning, though Catherine hired a young woman from the nearby town to help her during the days when pregnancy fatigue made even the simplest tasks seem like impossible mountains to climb. Emma visited frequently, bringing special fabrics from her haberdashery and news from Dodge City. On one of those trips, she shared news of her own that lit up Catherine's face with genuine joy. "I've met someone," she said, a blush tinting her cheeks pink that Catherine had never seen in her. "He's the new schoolteacher. His name is Thomas Edwards. And—" Catherine couldn't contain a smile at her friend's evident nervousness. "He's different. He treats me as if I were something precious but not fragile. As if he saw something in me that I can't even see yet." Catherine took Emma's hands between hers. "That's exactly what you deserve. Emma, someone who sees your light." As winter gave way to the first sprouts of spring, Catherine's belly grew, round and firm like a fulfilled promise. The nights were sometimes restless, the baby moving and kicking as if anxious to explore the world. In those moments of insomnia, Catherine often found William awake beside her, his large, calloused hands gently caressing the curve of her abdomen, whispering stories to the child they didn't yet know. "You're telling him about the ranch," Catherine said one night, recognizing in his whispers descriptions of horses and prairies. William smiled in the dim light. "I want him to know his home before he even sees it." Catherine thought about how her definition of home had changed over the years. Once it had been the small apartment above the Thompson store, then it had become this house at the Hayes Ranch, and now she understood that home wasn't a place at all, but this feeling of belonging, this love that grew and transformed, adapting to each new stage of life. The birth of Margaret Hayes occurred during an April dawn, when the first rays of sun began to tint the Kansas prairies gold. It was a long and difficult labor, with moments when Catherine thought she wouldn't have the strength to continue. But William remained by her side, defying the custom that kept men away from the birthing room, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her forehead, whispering words of encouragement. When her daughter's first cry filled the room, a sharp and vigorous sound that proclaimed her arrival in the world, Catherine felt such overwhelming joy that it erased all preceding pain as if it had never existed. "She's perfect," murmured William, tears running unashamed down his cheeks as the midwife placed the small bundle wrapped in blankets on Catherine's chest. Catherine looked at her daughter for the first time, a wrinkled little face, a mouth that instinctively sought nourishment, a tiny fist that waved against the blanket, so small, so complete, so miraculously present after months of existing only as a promise, a shared dream. "Hello, Margaret," she whispered, her voice broken with emotion. "We've been waiting for you." The following days passed in a haze of exhaustion and wonder. Catherine discovered that motherhood was both more difficult and simpler than she had imagined. Difficult in the sleepless nights, in the constant worry, in the vulnerability of loving so deeply a being so dependent. Simple in the way her body seemed to know exactly what to do, how to hold, how to feed, how to comfort. William proved to be a naturally devoted father. Catherine often found him in the nursery's rocking chair, holding Margaret against his broad chest, while softly singing songs he had learned from his mother, his deep voice lulling the little one to sleep. One afternoon, about a month after the birth, Catherine quietly entered the room and found William showing Margaret his grandmother's diary. "This will be yours someday," he was telling her, holding the small leather-bound book for the baby to see. "So you'll know where you come from, so you'll know you're part of a story that began long before you and will continue long after." Catherine remained at the threshold, not wanting to interrupt this intimate moment between father and daughter. There was an almost sacred beauty in the scene, the strong man holding the fragile child, past and future intertwined in a perfect present in its imperfection. That night, after putting Margaret to bed, Catherine found William on the porch, contemplating the starry sky with a thoughtful expression. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, sitting next to him on the wooden bench they had placed there to enjoy the sunsets. William took a moment to respond, as if organizing his thoughts. "About my father," he finally said. "About how he never knew this moment. About how he died believing a man's worth was measured only by his work, by what he could build with his hands." Catherine rested her head on William's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his skin, a mixture of soap, leather, and open air. "And what do you think?" "I think he was wrong," William replied simply. "Or at least incomplete. Yes, there's pride in building, in working the land, in seeing cattle grow. But none of that compares to what I feel when Margaret grabs my finger with her little hand, when you open your eyes in the morning and smile at me, when I see the store you've created, and that's now an essential part of this community." Catherine felt her eyes fill with tears, not tears of sadness, but of that kind of deep joy that sometimes resembles pain in its intensity. "I love you." "William Hayes," she said, the simple words charged with everything she couldn't fully express. "And I love you." "Catherine Hayes," he replied, gently kissing her forehead. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love." Spring gave way to summer, and Margaret grew with the same speed as the wildflowers that covered the prairies. Each day brought new discoveries, the first genuine smile not caused by gas, as William initially insisted. The first attempt to turn over, the first sound that wasn't a cry but a coo of pleasure upon seeing her mother's face. The store prospered, attracting customers even from neighboring towns, drawn by the reputation for honesty and fair prices Catherine had established. With Lily's help, the young woman she had hired during her pregnancy, Catherine found a balance between her role as mother and her work. One July afternoon, while Catherine gently rocked Margaret after feeding her, she heard the sound of a carriage approaching. Looking through the window, she recognized the elegant vehicle of the Montgomerys. Her relationship with the family had subtly changed since the incident with Emma. They weren't friends exactly, but there had emerged a mutual respect that would have seemed impossible a few years earlier. Eleanor Montgomery descended from the carriage with her usual studied elegance. She carried a package wrapped in fine paper and tied with a silk ribbon. Catherine received her on the porch, Margaret sleeping in her arms. "Mrs. Montgomery." What a surprise! Eleanor observed the baby with an expression Catherine had never seen on her face, a softness, almost a vulnerability. "I've come to meet little Margaret," she said, her tone less formal than usual. "And to bring her a gift." Catherine invited her in, surprised by the change in the woman who had once looked at her with such disdain. They sat in the living room, where the afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains, creating patterns of light and shadow on the wooden floor. Eleanor carefully unwrapped her package, revealing an exquisite christening gown made of the finest silk and adorned with delicate embroidery. "It belonged to my grandmother," she explained, her voice softer than Catherine had ever heard it. "She brought it from Virginia when she came west. Charlotte wore it, and George Jr., and even I, many years ago." Catherine touched the delicate fabric with reverence, understanding the magnitude of the gesture. "Mrs. Montgomery, this is— I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Eleanor replied, gently extending her arms. "May I hold her?" With a mixture of surprise and trust, Catherine placed Margaret in Eleanor's experienced arms. The transformation was immediate. The stern face softened, the rigid posture relaxed, and for a moment, Catherine glimpsed the young woman Eleanor had once been. "She's beautiful," Eleanor murmured, her finger gently stroking Margaret's rosy cheek. "She has your eyes but William's determined chin." They spent the afternoon in comfortable conversation. Eleanor shared stories of her own children when they were babies, offered practical advice that only experience could provide, and for the first time since Catherine had known her, seemed genuinely human. When it was time to leave, Eleanor turned at the door. "Catherine," she said, using her first name for the first time, "I owe you an apology. When you arrived in William's life, I thought you weren't good enough for him. I was wrong. You've brought something to this community that we didn't even know we were missing." Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. Eleanor looked toward the store, then back at Catherine. Compassion, the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. "Emma Wilson isn't the only person who has found hope through your kindness." After Eleanor left, Catherine remained on the porch, holding Margaret and reflecting on the strangeness of life, how people could change and surprise us when we least expected it. 5 years later, on another July 4th, Catherine stood in the same place where she had once questioned her worth, watching a very different scene. The Hayes Ranch had become a gathering point for the community. And this Independence Day, families from across the region had come to celebrate. Margaret, now a lively 5-year-old with golden curls and eyes that sparkled with mischief, ran among the other children, her laughter mixing with theirs in a symphony of joy. At her side toddled little James, the son who had arrived 2 years after Margaret, as determined and stubborn as his father, but with his motie. Hers tender heart. Emma stood near the refreshment table with her husband Thomas, her belly round with their first child expected in autumn. The transformation was complete. The fragile, frightened woman had become confident, radiant, secure in the love that had slowly healed her wounds. "Do you remember when you thought no one would ever love you?" asked William, approaching Catherine from behind and wrapping his arms around her waist. Catherine leaned against his chest, feeling the familiar warmth of his embrace. "It seems like a lifetime ago," she replied. "Sometimes I wonder who that woman was." "She was you," William said simply. "Just you waiting to bloom." Catherine watched their children play, observed their friends and neighbors sharing stories and laughter, contemplated the store that had become the heart of a small but thriving community. Her hands, once rough only from work, now bore the softer marks of motherhood. Small scars from kitchen accidents while teaching Margaret to cook, calluses from holding little hands learning to walk. "Do you think she's happy with how everything turned out?" Catherine asked, referring to William's mother, whose diary still rested in the trunk upstairs, now accompanied by Catherine's own writings documenting their family's daily life. "I think she's proud," William replied, kissing the top of her head. "I think she knew somehow that love would find us when we were ready to receive it." As the sun began to set over the Kansas prairies, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the local orchestra began to play. The same waltz that had brought Catherine and William together for the first time years earlier floated through the air. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Hayes?" William asked with mock formality. "Always, Mr. Hayes," Catherine replied, allowing herself to be led to the improvised dance floor. As they moved to the rhythm of the music, surrounded by the community they had helped build, Catherine understood that her story wasn't just about finding love, but about learning that she had been worthy of it all along. The empty hands of the prologue were now full, not just with the material things she had acquired, but with the intangible wealth of deep connections, personal purpose, and the quiet certainty that she belonged exactly where she was. The mirror that had once reflected a woman she didn't recognize now showed her someone she knew intimately. A woman who loved and was loved, who had learned that healing wasn't a destination but a continuous journey, who had discovered that the most beautiful gardens were those that grew from the soil of our own scars. Under the star-filled Kansas sky, with her husband's strong arms around her, and the sound of her children's laughter in the background, Catherine Hayes finally understood what her mother had tried to teach her so many years ago, that love. True love doesn't seek perfection but authenticity, doesn't demand that we be different but celebrates who we are and always arrives exactly when we're ready to receive it. The prairie wind whispered through the wheat, carrying with it the promise of tomorrows yet to be written, of stories yet to be lived, of love that would continue growing like the wildflowers that bloomed new each spring, resilient and beautiful, surviving every winter to bloom again. And in that moment, surrounded by everything she had learned to call home, Catherine smiled, knowing that her heart, once convinced it would never learn the language of love, now spoke it fluently in countless ways every single day.